Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Vaishakh and welcome to Thoughts and Tales, where we think some thoughts and share our tales. Hello everyone, how are you all doing, and welcome to this episode of Thoughts and Tales. In this episode I have with me my high school English teacher Mrs. Vaidehi Jois, and we mainly talk about why the arts and the humanities are so very important, and we also share a couple of experiences. So sit back, relax, and I hope you like this episode of Thoughts and Tales. Welcome back everybody. And hello Didi, first off, Happy Women's Day. How are you today?
Thank you very much, Vaishakh, for wishing me. I feel wonderful.
Okay, so can you give me a brief introduction to me about yourself?
Well, my name is Vaidehi Jois. I'm basically from Shimoga. I settled down in Mysore. I did my schooling in Mysore and as well as my college, my degree. Later on, I came to Bangalore and settled down over here. And I'm in teaching profession since 20 years.
Since 20 years. So to what all types of students have you taught over the years?
I have started from the primary level. That was my first teaching experience, teaching the students of primary level. And later on, high school. In fact, I have taught to students of post-graduations. That's it.
Okay, so I want to know more about your journey, and I specifically want to know why you became an English teacher. So out of all the subjects that are out there, why did you choose English?
Okay, Vaishakh, my father is actually a doctor. So I did take up science subjects in the degree level. Though I was in fact counseled by my cousin saying that no, your interest is not in science, but in humanities. But at that moment I thought science. But then later on, after completing my degree, I thought, I pondered over that. And there was a lot more interest towards the subject, the English language as such, rather than the science, though I like science also. So, in fact, I had to convince my father about it because I was branching out from the science stream to the art stream. So I had to convince him a lot, and later on I had to take an entrance exam, and then I got into that. And basically I love being an English teacher because humanities is something which is very close to our heart.
Okay. So that's why I want to talk about how we can appreciate the arts in a better way. So first off, what is it about the arts that make it so special?
See, arts is something, as I told you, which is close to our heart. Okay, because it deals with lots of emotions, which I think when you try to do an experiment in science, you would more rather look about, what kind of, measurement you have got, or what is the outcome of the experiment. That is what you're going to deal with, okay? But when you talk about humanities as such, it is something wherein you learn the life lessons as such. You've got many examples all through the world, you could say, which teach you lessons as such. And the first and the more important thing is the emotional bondage, which teaches you many lessons in life also. And right from the birth of a baby, you could see that bondage is there. And right from the baby, you start learning your language. And how do you associate that? You associate it with your mother first, right? Isn't it? With that, looking at her and learning, looking at her and watching her is how you start with your language. And the first, as everybody says, the first word which you speak is Ma, right? So the journey begins from that, and socially, you look around yourself and you feel that. And a feeling is also one of the emotions connected with arts. That's what I mean to say. And right from that till maybe the end stages of a life, it is something, a journey which takes you to the ups and downs of life. And you're closely associated with each and every aspect of it. And definitely it teaches you life lessons also, lessons wherein you learn from it and you learn from the mistake and try not to do it again, right? And sometimes when you talk about science and all, it gives you a chance to rectify your mistakes. Certain mistakes, when you do the experiments, you can always have a time. But when you talk about literature or arts or humanities as such, sometimes we do commit a mistake and we cannot redo it also. So this is a part of thing which teaches you what is right and what is wrong. So what life when you talk about humanities, it is quite interesting also. It is not something which, you can just make it fade away because it's a part and parcel of your life. Even history, for that matter, it's quite boring for the students. But then there's so many things you can learn from that.
So basically, the associations with the feelings and the life lessons make the arts so special. So I'd like to share an experience that I had with the Karnataka State Board this year was that I had a lesson called Ottomonition. In that lesson, the narrator, finds himself stuck in an extremely embarrassing situation and a complete stranger, from nowhere comes and saves him. So what I mean to say is that that lesson is full of values, but one of the questions which the education board asked was how far is the narrator's home from his homeland. So by asking such questions, which test your memory rather than your understanding and your feelings about the topic, aren't you removing the true essence from the arts? Aren't you removing the true essence?
See, Vaishakh, our system is of written examinations. Okay? So we need to write. That is there. But that could have been put in a very better way where you could have expressed your feelings after reading that story. Okay. Instead of asking a very straightforward question, you could have, the question could have been tilted in such a way where you start expressing what you felt reading that story. When we talk about our examination system, it is also a system wherein we need to analyze and understand whether the student has understood the lesson or not. So maybe that questions were asked so that the students, to judge the students whether they have understood the lesson or not. That is the basic one thing. But the other thing which I felt was they could have given us situational questions, same kind of a short story and asked questions based on that. Like what is your feelings or your expressions on the story? Or they could have asked you to write an article or a short story based on the same kind of value which you learn from that lesson. That is what is my take.
Okay, but when you ask such questions, there's no difference between a student who has just memorized and a student, who actually took his time and, understood and discovered the lesson.
Nothing like that, Vaishakh. It is the way you express the answer. A student who has read a guide would just express whatever is written in the guide. He would just write that. But the student who really understands the essence of that lesson, then understands the essence of the human value as such, would try to attempt that question in a very different way. There are various ways of attempting a question. Though you may give a reference to that lesson, but ultimately what you write would also be your expression. And that's the beauty of language, isn't it? You cannot have the same answer by everyone. Each person's perception of things is different. We look only for the idea whether the student has understood it or not. Okay, that is what we are going to judge. But the way the student writes is ultimately his own views, his own perception. And when I talk about language, yes, you cannot be bound as you are bounded by science, like if you're asked a formula or if you're asked some theory, you have to mention that theory. In languages, it is nothing like that. Each person has his own view of expressing it. The sense of perception differs from person to person.
That's interesting. So now I'd like to talk about the lost love for reading. So how do we bring back that lost love for reading? Because nobody is reading as much as what they would have done back then. And how do we discover the true essence of the arts or literature by rediscovering our lost love for reading?
Okay. Vaishakh, you could approach this problem in 2 or 3 ways. Okay, first of all, yes, with the advent of the new technology and all, definitely students have lost the interest in reading as such. And you cannot force people to read. It should come within them. The interest should be triggered within them that they need to read and understand. And let me tell you, there are people who still love to read as such. Okay, fine. At least, the habit of reading can be inculcated even when you have the technology with you. Why don't you just take up, like any stories or anything, whatever you want to read. Definitely you can read it, even in your smartphone. If you have that interest towards reading, if it triggers that interest in you and you really want to read something, it is not only the books, even the electronic media will help you with that, right? So the interest for reading should be there in a person so that he can read. Meaning that is what you have to look at the problem now. And that is one of the problems. Okay, fine. If you cannot, sit before a book and read it, definitely you have an alternative as your smartphone or a Kindle. You can just take it out and you can read. The basic idea is you should trigger that interest in reading in the children. Making the students read, I think you should have a lot of creative approach now, because students are, you could say, too much of diversions are there within the student, because of, you could say, the advent of television or the computers or the smartphone. So for that, you should kindle that interest in the students for reading, and that could be done in a various ways with lots of activities and all that. So basically, we teachers have to try out some creative ways.
So, do you think bringing back the lost love for reading will in any way help in people appreciating the arts and will help them understand the true essence of the arts?
Definitely, it will help. Yes, Vaishakh.
Okay. So now I'd like to give another perspective to our discussion. I asked my cousin who lives in the US on how they approach their language classes, and she sent me a mail. Now, this is going to be a long question, but this is how they approach their classes. First off, they do not have chapters like us. What they do instead is analyze novels. Instead of having multiple chapters, they stick to one novel and analyze it. They come up with an analysis on the characters and the symbols. And their discussions focus more on the themes rather than the plots also. She says if you give a plot summary, the teacher will cut your marks. For assignments, they have nightly readings and essays and also seminars where they talk about their findings. They also have multiple choice questions for poetry. Yeah, so what do you think about this approach?
Vaishakh, before answering your question, I want to know how you felt with the English classes.
I never had any problems with the English classes, but when you bring down the classes to a paper, an exam, well, marks are given based on how much you remember rather than how much you've understood, and marks are given based on how many words you've written. I feel that something's not right. That's all. So classes definitely can be fun.
So I understood what you want to say, Vaishakh. But let us talk about this in a very different way. See, when we talk about a class, a teacher has to cater to the needs of everyone. Okay? There may be few brilliant people in the class, and there may be few who are average as such. Okay? So when we have a class like this, and when we have to follow a particular stream as such, wherein the chapters are there and the question answers are there and everything, so I think basically sometimes the English classes go down to that level wherein it is just teaching, nothing else. Okay, whether you have understood this question, whether you have understood this lesson, have you understood the character, that's it. Basically, it goes down to that. But something which was very interesting in the CBSE stream which I teach is where you write the stories and the articles and all that. You can put forth your views on certain topics as such, and you do have a letter writing, story writing, wherein you can be very creative. And when you told me about your cousin who stays, in America and the way they approach towards English classes, definitely English classes should be like that. It should be more of an interactive sessions wherein you discuss about each and every aspect of the novel or a story given to you, rather than going through it line by line, and looking at the words and all that. But when I look at it in a very different perspective, Vaishakh, ours is a 3 hours written format of examination wherein whatever you have studied, you need to write it in 3 hours. Okay. So when the situation is like this, yes, some amount of creativity we do try to get into English classes. I think we did have few group discussions in the class. We did have debates in the class. These are some of these activities, let us see, we could try to implement in the classes to make it more interesting as such. because language, I think, is one period where you get time to discuss. Somewhere along the way, I do feel that system of, reading line by line and asking them whether they have understood, explaining them, like line by line. Somewhere along the way, the essence of teaching a language is not fulfilled. That's what I feel.
Okay, so approaching a system of learning like them will clash with our system of grading. So, what can we as students and teachers do in order to bring out the hidden messages in literature?
The thing is, when you take up something like any story or anything, you could just start from the story, in fact, the heading of that story, and ask the students what they feel. Before getting into the story and trying to understand that, you could try to analyze, the heading of that story and try to think why it is that title is being given. Now, the problem, however, what happens, Vaishakh, is sometimes if we give a silent reading, that is a wonderful way of having an English class, wherein the students read the story, silently, try to comprehend it, and try to analyze it and discuss with their friends. That's a very good method, I feel, wherein we could have lots of interaction, lots of discussions in the class based on the lesson as well, based on the characterization, and also why the author has, written that story in that format. You could have had a critical analysis on that story as such, wholly. And that would have been a very wonderful class as such, with all kinds of discussions happening. That would be one way of approaching things, so that will help the students to express their own views and try to understand, a story from all angles, not only the angle of what the teacher tells you, The teacher, while explaining, may certainly try to leave some of the important aspects which she wants to tell you, or she would have prepared and come, but with lack of time, and then she wouldn't have been able to tell you. But if at all we have a silent reading in class and everyone tries to, pitch in and discuss about it, and from the various angles, from the characterization or from the author's point of view or from your own personal view as such, that would be really an interesting class, And it would be something like a give and a take relationship, where even the teacher, in fact, gets very engrossed, and involved in those kind of discussion, merely coming over there and just giving a lecture. Definitely, I wouldn't even want to have a class like that. Some of those are tried at the higher level, at the PG level, where they do have discussions on the important aspects of novels and all that. There, definitely, you can't have a word by word meaning given over there. There, in fact, a novel is there for discussion, and we need to discuss from all points of view. You're given around 2 to 3 days, wherein you need to read the novel, and we need to have a class discussion on that. So that is their way of approaching the story. And sometimes I feel, Vaishakh, like discussing that kind, basically, giving a novel to a child and asking him to read it up, and then we are discussing in the class. Sometime, somewhere, the student wouldn't have been able to understand the whole essence of that novel, isn't it? So there lies, a great part of the teacher to see that the student understands it. You did have a novel, Three Men in a Boat. How did you feel about that?
Again, the same point. The classes were definitely fun, where we read and enjoyed. But once you reduce a 200-page novel like that into a 10-mark question in the exam, you're losing so many things. For example, when there's 2 or 3 days before the exam, the student is only bothered about securing that 10 marks. Whether you liked the novel or whether you appreciated the novel does not matter anymore from the exam's point of view. So you're losing so many things. Again,
that novel was prescribed for the students in London to study English history. Students learned about history through that book, in fact, Three Men in a Boat. And for our perception, when we look at that, it is just a story of 3 persons traveling on a boat and what all, incidents they encountered. That's it, over for us. But then the same book was prescribed for them to study English history. So the wavelengths should match, perceptions should match, people should be interested in knowing more about it. There definitely should be a class discussion. But I would like to ask you a question, Vaishakh. when I, in fact, try to introduce something, I don't think all the students are interested in that.
Okay. So then comes the question, why don't you offer the students a choice where only those who are truly interested can opt to learn language?
That is how you have, the 11th and the 12th stream, wherein they differentiate between the commerce and the humanities and the science. But I think up till 10th standard, they should have a little bit of knowledge about all the subjects. That's what I feel as such. Maybe after 10th standard, you branch out. You take up whichever subjects you like as such.
So I think that the education system in India wants to make sure that the students learn the language first and they necessarily don't, bother whether the students appreciate the literature.
Yes.
Right.
So the appreciation comes later. Now basically it is like how well you can write, how well you can speak. The focus is mainly on that. That's what I feel. The expression part, the understanding part, the creative aspect, that is for the students to rediscover himself. That's what I feel. Somewhere I feel very sad that the students are not exposed to these kind of things also, the creative way, of expressing things. Definitely that would really help them, in the future when they get into a good job or whatever it is. Because basically they need to know to express things rather than just know to learn, to speak few words or sentences. The students nowadays need to learn to express. But you did have ASL, which really helped you, isn't it? Speaking skills. Definitely that was one good aspect.
Okay. So now I'd like to come to the other part of this discussion, which is the tales section. So here I want to hear more stories. So can you tell me an experience, a fun experience which you had when you were teaching?
Basically, I'm from an army background, so I don't know my native tongue, that is Kannada. So after my marriage, I had to move to Dharwad. And one of my father-in-law's friend, who's a trustee of a school, he said, can you take a few classes for our students, because the teacher is going on leave. So I said, okay, fine. Then I asked him whether it's an English medium school. And he said, till 7th standard we have Kannada medium and 8th, 9th, 10th we have English. Fine. I said, I went that day. I entered the class. And I started the lesson. And as usual, the students were blinking. But I somehow tried to express myself. And then I got a word called lungs. Okay. And I had to explain few words in Kannada also to the students because basically they were from Kannada medium. And I didn't know the word for lungs.
In Kannada.
In Kannada. And I didn't know what to do. It was such an embarrassing situation for me. And I was looking here and there and pointing, taking breath and all that and trying to tell them then what lungs is. But they couldn't get it because as it is, I was somehow newcomer for them and then speaking in English like this and them trying to understand that. And suddenly I had to literally run out of the class. Okay, because it was such an embarrassing situation. And then I came out of the class and then I met the principal and then the principal told me it is Vaishakh, right? Am I right in pronouncing it? I may be. Yeah. Even now I don't know. And from that day I made it a point to refer to Kannada and English dictionary. And somehow my Kannada is a little bit better now.
This happens so often, because the English you talk and the English you speak and the English you write are all the same.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Kannada, Kannada is so vast. The Kannada which you speak is different from the Kannada which you write, which is different from the Kannada which you read.
And let me tell you, Vaishakh, my Kannada was so superb and those were the same students, I taught them only for 3 months, that's all. And then I had to move to Bangalore. And there were literally tears, in their eyes when they came to know that I was moving to Bangalore. So that was a fun thing. And it was something which made me, realize also the importance of our language, because basically we tend to speak only in English and Hindi more over there. And this was one learning thing which definitely I loved to, that phase of my life wherein I started with each word, literally translation from Kannada. That helped me. That is one of the most incidents which I still remember.
So, can you tell me an experience also with a student wherein the student turned out to be more than just a student?
An experience with the student. Okay. It was a ninth standard class, and I had to take up a poem called Mother by Rabindranath Tagore. The moment I started it, I gave the introduction to Rabindranath Tagore and about the poem Mother, and we talked about the importance of mother and all that. When the class was going on, I could find a student, he was fidgeting. He was not able to sit on his bench as such. So I pointed out to the student and asked him, why? What has happened? What's happening with you? And that student told me, how could you take up a poem like this? A poem titled Mother, when we know that one of our classmates has lost his mother. That was a defining moment for me. I really felt, yes, we do talk about students being very proud and arrogant and not disciplined, and not at all following the rules and the regulation. But that boy really touched my heart. He opened a new avenue. And somewhere from that day, whenever a thing like this, a poem like this, something which is quite emotional and I have to deal with, I really go back to that boy, think about him, and then I take up the lesson.
So it gave another perspective. It also shows that what we take for granted is somewhat.
Yeah, definitely. And I couldn't take up that poem at all, and the whole year I didn't take up. I felt no, when the student has expressed this, why should I take it up?
That was very beautiful. And can you also tell me an experience which imparted a life lesson like nothing else? You could almost say a new Vaidehi came out after that experience.
A new Vaidehi came out. There have been many funny incidents, many sad incidents, many incidents which have made me think about that person even now, a student of mine who was never interested in studying for that matter, and who was to always run away from home, who was to never be interested in studying and all that. And a little bit of counseling from my side did help that guy, and now he's better placed in the society.
So by counseling him, you counseled yourself. Okay. So is there any other experience which you'd just like to share?
Let me tell you, Vaishakh, another thing. I had just finished my post-graduation in English, and I had applied for the civil services examination, and I was studying for that. And one of my neighbor, in fact, asked me, take tuition classes for her son. Till then, probably I had no idea about that, taking classes or whether thinking that teaching would be my forte. I never thought about that. And I started taking the classes, and that got me interested in teaching, and that I think I'm a teacher by accident, maybe, I don't know. But that journey of being a teacher has been so wonderful. It has given a whole new dimensions to my life. I meet so many children, so many innocent kids, so many naughty ones, so many mischievous ones, and definitely they make my day. At the end of the day, I am a very satisfied woman, looking at all the kids growing up and, branching out into new directions. So I cannot say that there is one incident or two incidents, and many incidents in my life as a teacher. And they have made me what I am. They've taught me many things. They've taught me patience. They've taught me dedication. They've taught me to laugh, to enjoy, sometimes, because I used to be a very serious person. For me, studies, I used to be very, very serious regarding that. But then they've taught me to be very funny also. I think some of your classes have been also very funny, wherein I have enjoyed teaching you all. So experiences, they have made me a complete person, as such, wherein all kinds of these experiences have helped me to realize where I stand. It has made me complete now.
Wow, that was interesting. Okay, so just out of curiosity, what's your favorite novel and who's your favorite author?
My favorite author is Jane Austen, and my favorite novel is Pride and Prejudice. When I talk about Pride and Prejudice as such, it is such a beautiful novel wherein you have the various characteristics, and you have one strong and independent woman there, you know. So it's very a totally different world when I get into Pride and Prejudice as such, you know. And Jane Austen is one of my favorite authors that is there. You need to read that story to understand Vaishakh. You need to read that novel to understand why it is a favorite of mine, because it gives you a perspective into human emotion, a sense of belonging. It gives you a sense of what hatred means. It gives you a sense of what prejudice means and how we judge people at first sight, and then when you later on know that person and you know how wrong you are, the acceptance that you were wrong at the first instance. So that is something which is very beautiful, and that's why I like it.
And now, whenever you go and ask anyone, they always say that the book is better than the movie. So, why is the book always better than the movie?
When you read as such, you know, it is not only that you're reading the words and try to understand, you're also getting the feel of that. Okay? And maybe it also takes you into a world which you would never have imagined, you know. And definitely when you take up a book, you cannot stop until you complete that book. So that experience which you get, that experience of reading word by word and trying to understand, you know, and that I think visually you don't connect with it. It is just you're going there, watching something and coming back. But there are few movies which have definitely an emotional connect with you also. That charm, you could say, you know, which you get when you read a story, that you don't find it when you see that visual.
Okay, so now I just want to take a moment to thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and telling me your tales. Thank you.
Thanks, Vaishakh.
Okay, so that's the end of the episode, and I'd like to thank Akshata, my cousin, for helping me with that question over there. And I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I loved making it. Take care, have fun, and have a great day. My name is Vaishakh, and this was Thoughts and Tales.